Okay, welcome folks to the pregame. About 5 or 6 minutes before, we have Unfound on the Ground number 29, the disappearance of Solomon Northup. Let me get some of the usual again. I am just making sure my technology is coordinated and getting some things in the chat that I have there. Disclaimers and a few of the usual promo items. Again, at some point, whether you watch this eventually when it's published, or you're watching it tonight, participating. Again, please like this video if you're inclined to do so. And if you haven't subscribed already to the Unfound Podcast Channel, let's say you just found this or it was shared on social media, when it is distributed in about a month, give or take, that's an approximation, go ahead and subscribe. And then when it is published, when it is shifted by Ed Denzel from not public, I forget the exact term right now, to public, then go ahead and share it widely. But for now, as usual, we have our think tank folks helping, participating, and again, we appreciate the feedback they've given. And of course, I am, as usual, just putting here in the chat, theunfoundpodcast.com, which of course I will mention during the episode for all things unfound. So with that, we have about 4 minutes. And again, this is the pregame. This makes it as part of the actual video itself. That just is what it is. This gives me a chance to make sure my tech's in order and give some folks a chance to log on to a stream that's already going and go from there. The case of Solomon Northup, it's another historical case going back to the 19th century. We'll talk more about that. So again, if this is something that you're seeing when it's out there, once it's distributed by Unfound, again, please like and the video and subscribe to Unfound if you have not already. The Unfound Podcast Channel on YouTube. And again, once this is out there, published, available widely, publicly on YouTube in the future, by that point, if you're seeing it in that case, go ahead and share this video widely, please. But for now, we're not sharing yet. We're making it. There's a waiting period. There's a rotation, a cycle that Ed and I use to get these out there. But for now, certainly like it if you're here. We have about 2 minutes till we get started, so it looks like technology's in order. And I have my usual material there in the chat. Once we begin in about 2 minutes, I'll go through some of the usual overviews and we'll dive into this case for Unfound on the Ground number 29, the disappearance of Solomon Northup. As with many of our Unfound on the Ground case studies, gives us a chance to learn a little bit more about history in general, a little bit more about media in general, a little bit more about public communication in general, which of course is my area of specialty as an associate professor of communication. So it's always interesting to think about these sorts of situations and events and people through those lens. With that, we have about a minute left in our pregame, and I can say for sure that I am highly enthusiastic about this. I try to use the chat, as we know by now, Boy, it's been so long. It seems like forever ago. We shifted from the use of Zoom to YouTube Live. In the YouTube Live, especially with the chat, besides the important interaction with our folks in think tank folks, it provides a sort of an opportunity to provide a running bibliography, at least for folks who want to study the case more. In other cases, early on in the Unfound on the Ground, we were talking about different methods. Hello, Kathy. Welcome. And then we shifted, and this was, I think, something that Ed had prompted, to start using specific cases as case studies, to think through how some of those mindsets and methods that we talked about in those early episodes could be applied, could be relevant, while also, of course, featuring, discussing, and in some cases, giving some attention to some discussions that maybe needed more attention. Carol Ann, welcome. So it is 8:15 Eastern Time, 6:15 Mountain Time. I'm in North Dakota. Welcome to Unfound on the Ground, number 29, The Disappearance of Solomon Northup. Again, I'm highly enthused for this episode tonight. I'll try to be for all the episodes, but this is a particularly fascinating case with a lot of important history. Eric Grabowski is my name. As folks know, I am part of the assisting team for Unfound. I've been a guest once on Unfound on a case in North Dakota. And I have been with a lot of help from important people, think tank people, of course, Ed and other team members facilitating this Unfound on the Ground. Hard to believe we're on number 29. Yes, it is, Kathy. It is fascinating. There's no doubt about it. So again, usual disclaimers. Again, primarily, I'm a associate professor of communication. My primary trade, so to speak, is that in academia. But on the side, I do cold case journalism. And again, my views tonight don't necessarily reflect those of my employing institution. Again, you're always free to give any of the disclaimers that you want. I do have the usual in the text chat, right? The unfoundpodcast.com. If you're watching this video at a later time after it's made, that's a site you'll always want to visit. Again, like the video, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And when this video is public, go ahead and share it widely. Again, we do that on a cycle. So this episode number 29 will be recorded, video, audio, including the text chat. Chat participation's an option for folks. For the journalistic, promotional, and or commercial purposes of Unfound, the audio and video recording, including the text, of this digital meeting will be distributed by Unfound. By participating in this digital meeting, you agree to give Unfound permission to use the rendering of your words for journalistic, promotional, and or commercial purposes with no compensation to you from Unfound, its assistants, its affiliates, its partners, etc. Again, by now, I should have that straight up memorized, but I don't. But close, I guess. So our usual guiding questions, right? What do we know? What don't we know? What avenues of analysis and research are applicable? Interestingly, and I was reminded, and even before I had some communication with Natasha, and certainly some of you remember Natasha, I was thinking about this case in terms of what we had discussed going back many episodes when we were talking about different ways of thinking about and researching missing persons cases. Of course, the discussion of culture, right? And of course, through any of these cases, we get cultural insights and cultural reflections, but it also gives an insight into understanding the history and culture of a place, of a time, of people, are going to be important for grappling with some of the different nuances and possibilities of what that case might entail. And of course, that also points to the importance of place, right? Just in terms of, obviously geography, we've talked about that. But as we think about from so many angles, the importance of place in our lives and in the lives of those that we think about historically. Natasha is joining us tonight, which is great. So it's kind of apropos to be thinking about those sorts of things. And Natasha is here tonight, so welcome, Natasha. So just get a couple things out of the way. I don't say out of the way. I don't want to sound like it's not important, but what I mean is on the front end, so that we have reference to it. You'll see in some of the different sources that in Saratoga Falls, New York, there is one of those historical markers pertaining to commemorating Mr. Northup, and that's important. There is also, and you'll see this discussed, I'll try to remember this one more time, the family and locals in that area establishing, going back over 20 years now, Solomon Northup Day in July. And so I have from that website, solomonnorthupday.org, just that information, which also provides some other historical material that you can look at and think through for sure. So that's important. And, when we think about the case, and of course, I'm going back to Unfound on the Ground number 27, where we talked about Ambrose Bierce, right? We're also dealing again with a significant American literary figure whose life encompassed the 19th century. Now, with Bierce, of course, if we remember, he did live into the 20th century. Northup was born in 1808 and died probably sometime in the 1860s. We don't know for sure. Obviously, we'll get into that. And then with David Wilson from New York, he wrote that book, 12 Years a Slave, which was published in 1853. For me, and again, as we think about what's helpful, and I'm providing what we might call a case study overview. I'm certainly by no means an expert on the Solomon Northup history or situation or disappearance. But as we think about what would be good tools, right? We talk about primary source material. We talk about relevant and credible secondary sources, right? We talk about human sources, human resources, people that we might not talk to. Of course, in this case, that's going to be folks who may be descended from Northup or local townsfolk who have worked to keep the memory alive, as well as key scholars or journalists who are expert. And certainly all that would be a part of this. I could tell you this, if I had the time, and I know once in a while I say this, this would be, and right now I just don't, to take on anything more in terms of deeper research with my overall schedule. But this would be a case that I would follow, and I highly encourage others to get to know with more depth. And as we'll see, there's some important historians who've worked to keep this going. There's a 2013 article, Wall Street Journal, one of the blogs, by a Mark Robichaud, What Really Became of Solomon Northup After His 12 Years a Slave. Very important article. It was helpful to me in terms of aspects of the questions itself, as well as pointing toward some of the other resources that are out there, particularly the historians, which we'll talk about. And I also, one of those historians, David Fisk, whose work is helpful, and I had shared as one of the preliminary resources the C-SPAN clip that has him there, which is very helpful to get a good sense of Northup's life overall, which is important to understand. But his life's interesting, and you have to kind of understand the lead up to to the book, and then the years after the book to even think through some of the things that might have happened to him. The full title of the book and I'll give it, we tend to say 12 Years a Slave, but this is the full title of the book. 12 Years a Slave, Narrative of Solomon Northup, a citizen of New York, kidnapped in Washington City in 1841 and rescued in 1853 from a cotton plantation near the Red River in Louisiana. That's the full title. And again, that is published in 1853. There was, in Williams' 2014 National Endowment for the Humanities article, he talks about TV, PBS made-for-TV movie in 1984, Solomon Northup's Odyssey. And then in 2013, there was the acclaimed movie, 12 Years a Slave, which now I have not seen, but it's now going to be on my A list of movies to see. Certainly, and we see this through, Fisk and Robichaud and others. The movie obviously widened and raised the story of Solomon Northup and his work, his literary work, in a broader sense among the American public. Although you can see certainly the work was known and had literary significance. So, and I'm just building here, Fisk. Yep, Kathy, I've not seen the movie either. And again, it's one I'm going to see. And I'm going to try to hunt down to see if I can figure out a way, whether it's through the local library or somewhere online, the made-for-TV movie that PBS put out there in the 80s. And I know folks are talking here in the chat here, greeting each other. Again, welcome to everyone, Kathy, Carol Ann, Natasha, anyone else that's here. So, and I'm just going back to the Fisk video from C-SPAN 2017. So in about 1834, right, Northup made his way to Saratoga, and from there, his wife was a cook, and she found work, obviously, in that capacity, helping out. And Solomon Northup was a violinist. He was talented musically, which, of course, as we learn, would be part of his part of the how he ended up getting caught or captured to be a slave. He engaged in various forms of labor. He was not born a slave. His father had been freed by a family with the name Northup. But in 1841, basically he was tricked by two guys who were talking about employment with the circus. Again, Northup was a talented as a violinist. And so basically they kidnapped him. He ended up going to D.C., Washington, D.C., by way of D.C. to New Orleans, and then ends up on a slave market, and then basically, quote unquote, owned as a slave for 12 years. But then again, according to Fisk, there was a New York law that allowed the New York governor and the government to assist basically folks who had been freed and captured. There was a lawyer from the Northup family, extended, who was able to help Solomon Northup in terms of the freedom. But there were challenges. For instance, the name that Solomon Northup had in the logs and that he was using because of the circumstances was given to him was Platt, P-L-A-T, and then Platt Hamilton. And again, according to Fisk, Hamilton was a fake name that one of the kidnappers had used. So that provided a bit of a challenge for this Henry Northup to find Solomon, but he did, and was basically, long story short, was able to get Solomon Northup back to New York. And they were able to catch up with the two kidnappers, and there was a lot of procedural argument with attorneys. Basically, never went to trial and never had a conviction, although they did spend some time in holding in prison. And that was that. And basically, in 1853, then Solomon Northup published the 12 Years a Slave, which again was a significant work. And so from there, and again, so Northup was a slave in Louisiana. The book itself is, and this is discussed with the National Endowment for the Humanities. You could see this in various discussions, literary discussions, the importance of 12 Years a Slave in terms of the narrative tradition, slave narrative tradition, obviously American literary work in general. That's a National Endowment for the Humanities article, and gives a sense of way or set of ways of thinking about history, as well as the unfortunate experience of persons of color who lived through slavery. So you're getting, of course, when we think through these slave narratives, coupled with history and literature in general, sort of objective and subjective dimensions of what that institution and its implications are like. Usual disclaimer, folks, this is incredibly important history, both in terms of the individual, Solomon Northup, his family, and as well as the time and what we learned from that time in terms of racism and slavery. But of course, we're not, as always, in terms of our contemporary times, not endorsing or getting into any particular political positions or ideological positions on any of these issues. So where and this is Robichaud features this, where Northup was a slave, basically is now the Epps House on the Louisiana State University of Alexandria campus, and accounts indicate that Northup helped to actually build this house. And so, that's down there in Louisiana. And I have here from the Explore Louisiana website just a little bit of overview about that. And of course, they link over to that university's website, which is, if you look at it, it just gives a basic list of all their buildings. So that's that in terms of place and giving some location to this. That's important. So what we have is also too, according to Stromberg in the Smithsonian 2014, before Northup's book was published, the story did get some coverage in the New York Times. Okay, now one thing that would be interesting to dig into also, again, whether that's through newspapers.com or through any number of databases that usually are available through a library or maybe even the Google News Archive, if it goes back that far, is what before, during, and after sort of the before and through the publication of the book, some of the other coverage that Northup's life or plight or book would have gotten. That would be important research. Of course, these historians that we're featuring certainly sift through those sorts of things, but it would be interesting if one were to go deeper into the case to look into some of those media pieces in the newspapers. So I mentioned we have the Solomon Northup Day in Saratoga Springs, New York, Saratoga Springs, New York. And that points to, and you can see some of the interest in that, from family members and others, interest in Solomon Northup's family history forward in time, involvement with people who are descended from Northup or locals in the state of New York who are interested in his life and legacy, and ultimately what happened to him. Let's see if I have that Stromberg. First of all, let me share the Stromberg coverage with you, because Stromberg gets into some of this New York Times coverage with references, so that's helpful. The other thing to keep in mind in terms of, again, with some of the legal aspects tied to any grievances or legal action against the kidnappers, there were various legal mechanics to that, but obviously please keep in mind, and this is mentioned by various by sources, that for a black man at that time, not necessarily having the legal standing, not that it was completely devoid, but not having the same level of legal standing to be able to be part of the mix or pursuing legal action, certainly in the same way as years later, and certainly not the same way as whites, or some whites at that time, or many whites. So that's something to keep in mind. So according to one of our sources here, the last documented public sighting, and by sighting here, documented in a newspaper, is 1857. Okay, 1857. So what happened to Solomon Northup? And so this is where the mystery gets interesting and important in terms of a human life. And by the way, as usual, as we're going through this, if anyone has any comments, thoughts, suggestions for research, it's important. Now, again, it was the Robichaud article that points to the, and it is Robichaud who mentions that, and I believe relying on Fisk and some of these other historians. And it's the Robichaud article that I followed more of Fisk's work. But of course, there's Fisk and then Clifford Brown and Rachel Seligman, who were important authors. And they actually have a book together that, if one were to pursue this case deeply, and this is a book that should be read. Again, I've not read it. This material is something that is new to me from an overview standpoint in terms of building for this episode. But if you are going to dig deeply into this case, there's no doubt, starting this book, Bloomsbury's the publisher, Solomon Northup, The Complete Story of the Author of 12 Years a Slave, published 2013. And so that's by Fisk, Brown, and Seligman. Okay, that's an important book, no doubt, if you were going to pursue this case and study it with depth. Seems like it'd be something to read anyway. That's interesting. Definitely going to get it on my reading list for sure for that. So, and again, I'm just drawing from various sources here. Let's just give some overview. Northup was likely part of the Underground Railroad. He did participate in abolitionist activities. He also knew, to what extent I'm not sure, Frederick Douglass. So he was, visible in that sense, in terms of helping other slaves and making arguments and being a part of that very difficult mix of the fabric of 19th century American life, particularly for a black man. He did have, he at one point owned property in Glens Falls, New York. He did fall into money troubles, had some financial challenges. And so when we think about some of the possibilities of what had happened to him, there is the possibility, of course, that he died of natural causes. Now, to what extent did he fall into destitute circumstances or some degree of difficult circumstances? Obviously, that's unknown. Less amount of evidence suggests the possibility that he went to Virginia to live with his daughter. although not an impossibility. But again, whether he sort of had the ups and downs of economics life or went further downward, he could have certainly died of natural causes. I don't see and haven't seen, and of course, not having read that book yet. And by the way, there are other, certainly other scholarly materials out there about Northup, but I'm pointing to what is some of the most recent and extensive with depth. I didn't see anything that indicated strongly the possibility of suicide. The man had a very difficult life. Clearly is recognized as someone who was incredibly resilient. Keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing. Of course, we can't completely take that off the table, but it doesn't seem to be something that is discussed unless I'm missing something. And number two, and again, those are very difficult, hard things to ascertain. I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist or a counselor, but it just doesn't seem to fit at a basic level. Carol Ann, it seems his wife was doing okay. That is correct. And we have some more about that. It seems his wife was doing okay. Obviously, she wasn't captured. She was also strong and versatile and did, as far as we can tell, based on all available evidence, did live longer. So another question that's out there, was he a spy for the Union Army, captured or killed? Now, I didn't pursue that a lot. I didn't see a lot on that, although there's probably some out there as a possibility. But that's definitely something that I have here on the list. Again, even if he had no connection to the Union Army in that sense, as someone who was to some extent involved in abolition, and apart from that, with the story of his life, which was known adequately. Yes, this is pre-internet, pre-social media, pre-TV, pre-radio. We're basically dealing with newspaper, telegraph, word of mouth. Okay, print, right? News and opinion, pamphlets, conversation. He was a target. He would have been a target. There was some discussion or speculation that could those people who were involved previously in his kidnapping went after him? Maybe, maybe not. That's an evidentiary question. And then, of course, could he have been a target in some other way? It's possible. Again, I'm not saying there's a great deal of evidence out there to suggest that. But there is no, and this is Fisk, this is Robichaud, this is others, there's no available documentation for his death or burial. In the state of New York, however, regular records did not start until the 1880s. However, the plight of a black man, a black person in terms of focus in Northup's time, would not necessarily get the attention anyway in terms of tracking what happened to him, especially if he died by natural causes. Now, I'm not saying that persons of color were completely unaccounted for, but obviously it was a different time, and there would have been differences there in terms of, at least by degree, if not kind. Right? In terms, there's the possibility of violence contributing to the end of his life. He would have been a target. Right? He would have been a target at some level. There's also here in Robichaud relies on Fisk and Brown on this. Did Northup reinvent himself, so to speak? Did he get a new identity? Citing Brown, Robichaud. Did he go to the West Coast for opportunity? Right, that was out there. This idea of being an adventurer that was part of his resilience. That's an interesting one. Obviously, the challenge of this sort of case is that we're dealing with the difficulties of the historical record. Right? If I was going to research this with great depth, again, and keeping in mind that these historians have dug through these materials, but look at, when you read that sort of book or those sorts of articles, you're following those references, you're looking at what's interesting, even for your own learning, right? Re-looking or looking at those primary source materials. As I mentioned, those old newspaper databases, again, newspapers.com. Again, whether you choose to subscribe to that or ancestry.com, that's up to you. Resources that are available through libraries, as well as what might be available through Google News Archives. And again, that's also not just from that time, but what discussions of Northup might be available through the decades leading up to the last 10, 20 years, when clearly, 10 years especially, when there's been a sort of revisitation of his life and to some extent his disappearance. Regardless, the lack of available documentation regarding the final years of his life, right, federal, state, local, make this case very difficult to conclusively solve over time. If one were to network with this, if one were to say, you know what, I want to really dig into this case, I want to be someone, I would certainly say, right, I want to network with these historians, I want to talk to the family members, I want to see what some of the family members have done in terms of genealogy. Some of the discussions we're seeing, of course, the Fisk material is available through Forward in Time, now through maybe 2019, 2020, 2021, up to 2023, right? I would want to sort of track what those family members have learned. I would want to look into some of the history journals and see if there's been some follow-up to this. This is a page from what seems to be Fisk's personal site. It does give some of the references there. Okay. And by the way, if you're interested in the book itself, I know on the Fisk site it links to a place if you want to take a look at it. We have some places out there. It would be an interesting and important historical read. And so in terms of learning our history. Okay, folks, as always, if you have any questions or comments about what do we don't know in particular, and what might we do to dig more deeply into this, of course, I've covered some of the regulars. Fisk is a great resource on this. There was his 2019 article. Maybe this was the other preliminary resource that I shared, and this also gives some information too about his family, which also, of course, helps us maybe understand to some extent what happened to him. His wife Anne died in 1876. Again, I'm drawing primarily from Fisk here. Interestingly, and I think this is implied in what I'm saying and what's at least in one or two of our comments, through the documentation that's available, we actually know more to some extent about members of his family and their trajectory, their years, and many times final years, than we do about Solomon Northup's life. All right, we know more about them. We know more about them. So as we go through the Fisk article from the Glen Falls Chronicle 2019, right, it's you get into some of the, and again, Fisk is an article. Fisk is an expert, a historical expert about Northup's life. We saw that in the C-SPAN video. He had the financial setbacks. There were financial judgments against him. He had those financial problems along the way. And his extended family clearly had some ups and downs on their own. But we know more about them. And we know more about them in terms of his daughter and then son-in-law. We have, and I'm looking here to see about Anne. Again, she died 1876. That was reported in the local newspapers. According to Fisk, she was doing chores for a private family, and upon sitting down to rest, expired. She was a strong woman and an active woman, obviously working a lot, and so forth. And this is just Fisk again. Despite the racial prejudice that was common in those days, the Northup family overcame numerous obstacles and achieved some success and gained respect in the predominantly white communities in which they lived. So there was a lot of resilience and strength through difficult times that we can learn from the Northup family. The drinking, yes. So Carol, the use of alcohol and the to extent to which that could have had an impact, that's a factor that one has to consider for sure. Any other factors come to mind as we think about it? Again, I don't think that the idea of the possibility, as far as I'm concerned, of suicide is very low on the list of possibility. However, the financial challenges that he faced, and again, possibly with other factors, if he sort of, I don't want to say went off the grid, that's not what I mean for sure, but sort of met a unfortunately quiet demise of natural causes, dying from natural causes. Certainly not disconnected from his family. I'm not saying that either, but basically circumstances and choices that would not necessarily put him, particularly as a black man, in the public record any longer. Kathy, I am guessing he either W, and I'll let you complete the thought when you can. I'm also sharing here, I'm not going to go through every source, but if you're interested in just more local aspects of his life and what's done there, there's the Saratoga Springs and various local ways or state ways that his life is commemorated or discussed. Just put, as usual here, well, not usual, but once in a while, a Google search string that one could use. I could tell you if one wanted to, if you were doing tourism or you happened to be going through the state of New York, even if you had no interest in going really, really deep on this case or becoming sort of an expert at any level, it would be interesting to visit that area and sort of be in that place. I am guessing he was either murdered or died of natural causes somewhere, like maybe having a heart attack in the woods or something like that. Just giving an opinion. This is not conclusive. This is not even like a strong opinion. This is just me, individual, not even officially speaking for Unfound, just saying my leanings on this after sorting through Fisk and Robichaud and some of the other sources, and of course not having read the book and not having seen the movie, but wanting to. My hunch at this point is that it's more likely that he died of natural causes in somewhat of challenging circumstances. Now, whether alcohol or some other condition or circumstance contributed to that, obviously, those are open questions. But it gets fascinating. First of all, what you learn, sort of the life of the man and his family, incredibly important as such, in the prism that is to learn more about that time and about time forward, right? In terms of how family members and community people sort of connect or reconnect with their legacies. As folks know, my main hobby is in terms of amateur genealogy and family history research. And certainly if one were going to dig deeply into this, you could learn those family members of Solomon Northup who learned about him and how they learned about it. I mean, that's an interest that provides interesting case studies as such. Carol Ann, the years a slave probably took a toll on his body. Absolutely. Kathy, agree. Natasha, interesting to know how his identity changed throughout entire ordeal, from free, born, to slave and back again. Easier to resign to slave identity at times, or retain who he was to make it day to day. That's fascinating. And Natasha, of course, as always, you're bringing an insightful and, in some level, an academic perspective to this. In some, at least one, and I've already shared the link about the discussion of slave narrative. And certainly I know, and you know too, Natasha, academically, and even generally, right? That becomes sort of an interesting literary, historical, cultural, rhetorical discussion, debate, right? How folks in those circumstances grapple with or navigate that framework, which of course has implications for the legacies. But as a human being, and I won't get it too much in here into the weeds of academic debate, I will say as an individual, Solomon Northup exercising his moral agency, his will, and pushing forward through difficult times. Boy, that was a heck of a task. That was a heck of a task. Of course, any human being, in terms of what happens to them, in terms of when they disappear, we know unfound, that's always important. But this sort of plight, this sort of history brings a lot to that. Again, as always, just because people look at it and because it is occasionally discussed, I'm going to share the Wikipedia article. Again, usual disclaimer, Wikipedia doesn't necessarily have adequate editorial review. It doesn't necessarily mean everything in it's untrue, but there may be things that need to be better documented. But again, I share it with that disclaimer in mind. Also, we have the article that has the nice overview of the two movies. And again, I am going to try to hunt down, just for my own interests, the 1984 film too, to see if that's available. But there's no doubt that the acclaim of the movie from basically about 10 years ago now, give or take? Yeah, 2013. Right, raised more attention to the life and disappearance of Solomon Northup. Other thoughts, please continue to share. There is one other article I want to mention. And again, this is an AP article that appeared on the nationalnews.com. Again, it gets into, and again, this is one of the sources that I had in mind when I said that we're thinking about various possibilities. And again, Clifford Brown, right, quoted in here. There's no paper trail for him. That's the challenge with this. So even those who have done the genealogy of it have had challenges. And again, we've talked before about sort of the difficulty of establishing. Kathy, I read the wiki info in the article you posted. Great. This poor guy had a tough life. Absolutely. So even from a genealogical standpoint, right, just a general historical standpoint, you go with what's available in terms of media reports. You're looking at source documents, but you got a guy who there's just not a lot of paper trail for. And imagine if you were, trying to study more from a genealogical descendant standpoint. You're trying to piece things together. I mean, how many times have we talked about in this important forum the importance of establishing matters of fact adequately with accuracy, and then sort of what's debatable or what's questionable, and then based on that for further research, you're using sort of inference and springboarding to other possibilities, but cautiously and trying to make educated guesses. So there is no doubt. And we can see this through some of the examples of the historians and the family members in the community trying to piece what they can together. Right. But no doubt, Kathy, right? The guy had a really difficult life, but had that level of adventure and resilience. And to be able to put that book together basically within the same year of his of his finding freedom, right? That is interesting. Anyone else have any thoughts? Please keep sharing. I want to make sure, again, I try to be, and I'm enthusiastic for all of our topics. I try to do that and portray that authentically. But I tell you, for this one, if I were to add another case into my, sort of deep research, this would be one. I know that I say that on occasion. This would certainly be one. There's just so much to this. The challenging thing, though, again, and of course, as we know, every once in a while, new historical discoveries are made, or some crop of documents, or some lost document, or some document that, remember the Ambrose Bierce, right? There was a document that was there. Sometimes things are hiding in plain sight, but, this many years later, right? If he died in the 1860s, most likely, and so this is 2023. I don't want to say that every known document that we'll ever have has been found, but we have a lot of material. And so always sorting more through that is going to be helpful, right, in terms of looking at those sorts of things. So I'll summarize again. What are some possibilities, right? Some level of financial challenges, probably then dying of natural causes. Is there a possibility that he was some sort of murder? Whether that was an immediate sort of thing or some sort of homicidal situation where he was attacked and gets away and dies of those causes, who knows? We're not looking to be morbid here. Did he reinvent himself, right? As one of the authors cited, asked. Did he go off? That one, to me, it's interesting. It may fit his character as to who he was, as sort of a black man being an adventurer for his time to the extent possible. I would want to know with that, and I'm sure these historians deal with it in their book or articles. If you were to take that scenario out, this is someone who seemingly had a good, would have some level of ongoing connection to his family. So who would have known what in what way? That's an interesting question. His abolitionist activities certainly are of historical note. From a learning standpoint, that would be interesting. Now, does that connect to his disappearance or not, right? We don't know. Carol Ann, I need to read the book. Is there any information regarding what his wife or other family members thought happened to him? That's a great question. That's actually, I didn't think of that. Thank you, Carol Ann. This is why we have our think tank folks helping. That's an important question from a research standpoint. Maybe that's in the book. I think I'm going to put the book on my reading list anyway, even if I never dig more deeply, just to read because it's important. And so as far as I know, as far as I can tell through looking at the sources, there's not like there was we've looked at some other really old cases and, like Charlie and others, right? That there was, what happened to Charlie? The question here is he disappears from the historical record. And so from a certain point of view, this is a missing persons case. But then the question is, what did the family know? What was known? Was there any discussion about that? That's very important. Thank you, Carol. His abolitionist activities are important as such and get interesting. Again, whether that becomes something that is tied to his demise, we don't know. To what extent are other factors such as alcohol, I mentioned economics and finances, play a role in it? Did those previous kidnappers or others target him in some way? Certainly at some level, he would have been a target for his time. A black man would have been a target anyway, depending on their circumstances at some level, but he was visible. The guy had national media attention. His story had national media attention before the book was published. And of course, the book had media attention. Certainly, he had state, regional attention. People knew who he was. And again, I think Natasha makes the interesting analytic and historical point, how he navigated that freeborn to slave and back again. Kathy, inequality factors even though he was freed again. There's no question about that. There's no question about that. I would like to know, and I would think, based on what I'm getting from Robichaud and these historians, that in that area, and I would particularly look at well, I'm going to hold off on saying an institution specifically, but I would want to go through the work of those authors, as well as the local colleges and universities there. I would be interested to know what the archives, the collections. I know in the Robichaud or one of the others, one of the names mentioned was someone that had to do with museum or library work, a curator. That's it, Rachel Seligman, an exhibition curator at Union College in Schenectady. But I'm not sure if that's where any sort of archives are located, but I would want to find that. And there may be things dispersed around the country too. I haven't even talked really frankly enough about Louisiana tonight, what might be down there. Robichaud has connections to Louisiana. He talks about that he grew up in central Louisiana in his Wall Street Journal article, which I shared. So that would be interesting, what sorts of archives are out there, just from a historical learning standpoint, let alone further discussion of this case. Carol Ann, work associates around the time he disappeared might have information. Of course, they are long deceased, but they could have passed on information. Another great point, and actually a general point that comes out just certainly in some of these discussions that we have with these sources, looking at, the names. It might have been Fisk that mentioned this. The names that when you find Platt Hamilton and the names around him, you look into Northup's work, people he talked about, you could loop that over to other people he knew in his community, what sort of chatter was out there. Of course, we're dealing with word of mouth, stories passed on in families, what might be in newspapers, letters, correspondence, who knows what's out there. We don't have Twitter, we don't have Facebook, we don't have TV, we don't have radio. We're really dealing in that media age that we've become so used to, particularly with the explosion of radio, particularly commercial radio. Okay, here we go. Natasha, we studied La Amistad, slave ship, and anthropology of museums class. Apparently some drowned in just a few feet of water. Could not face slavery even one day. Wow. Right. Did they build his family tree in the book? Kathy, that's interesting. I don't know. But I should know. And that's something that would be an interesting thing to follow up. But I would say that those people locally who've been involved in that town and in the Sullivan Northup Day, there's at least one lady that's a descendant. I'm sure there are other relatives. They clearly have at least some significant family history information that's available. If you look on that page, that may have some information. And I'm going to open that up here again one more time, share that because of the sort of discussion we're having right now. Okay. So this is sharing that again. I've watched almost all the episodes of Finding Your Roots. Great show. All of the work my younger sister has done for her family. Yeah. And it's interesting thing on those shows, how people get surprised of things they learn that were in their background, or married in or married out, or, children who might have been, someone's great grandfather, and all of a sudden, wow, I never knew that. Of course, this is one reason why I'm big into amateur genealogy, and I could talk, as you guys know, for hours and hours and hours about that. So we're down to about 5 minutes. Great discussion. We have a case that's just incredibly fascinating. Again, all missing persons are important. We know that. But certainly, obviously, as folks know, I try to maintain a focus on the older cases. There's just so many tools of learning that can be engaged, and how difficult is how some of the info to locate. Yes, absolutely. It's challenging. It's incredibly challenging. So again, please like this episode, whether you're involved now or you're watching this later. If you've not subscribed to the Unfound on the Ground podcast channel, please do so. Again, if you've not done that now, or if in the future you're watching this when this is released. Again, when this is public, not quite yet, but when it will be, folks will know. At that point, please share widely the episode. We appreciate the work of our think tank folks. And tonight, Natasha helping out, joining us. And again, I was thinking about some of Natasha's past contributions to these discussions anyway. And of course, we had some communication, and here she is. So we welcome that. And as always, she had some great thoughts. Again, Unfound on the Ground, number 29, folks. Number 29. Can you believe it? We've been doing this over 3 years. We started it at some point, spring to summer during COVID. I can't remember exactly when. And so great work. Again, we appreciate the contributions of think tank folks. And again, Ed, our fearless leader, and the other team members for Unfound, always helpful. And again, as I always say, someone out there knows something, or knows someone who knows something. Now, again, in this case, that seems a bit of a stretch, but conceptually not completely unapplicable, especially if you were going to pursue discussion with family members, or as we've indicated here in the chat, are there other families out there that have letters or speculation or have heard things? Now, I'm sure local community members and those historians have thought through that. So this case provides a lot of good basis for thinking about the tools and methods that we've thought about in the past. It certainly gives us insight as a case study, and it's important material anyway, because the man, his family, the times, and what we learn going forward in the future. So always, folks, have a great week. Keep up the good work. And thanks to everyone who joined us today. And again, don't forget about the unfoundpodcast.com for all things Unfound. And with that, be well, folks. One more time, have a great week. And I'm now ending the stream.